Well, if everyone here is for leveraging Apple tools to make your iOS deployment easier, then you are in the correct spot. So congratulations, because I know the last day of a conference, sometimes even that can be an achievement. I have a link on the bottom of this slide as well as the next two, so you don't have to rush down and type this address in. It's a copy of the slides, so if you're interested in following along, you'll be able to do so. Come on, clicker. This is the hope. The hope is that by the time you leave this session or you're dealing with some format of a deployment of devices, for me it's education. If anyone here is business or university, students, employees, that you can say that was easy. I don't have the easy button, unfortunately. I didn't bring that with, but kind of that same thing. A little bit of info quickly about me. Again, the slide link should be right up there on the top. My name is Randy Saeks. I'm a network manager for Glencoe School District 35, and we are a K-8 school district of about 1,200 students, a little bit north of Chicago in Glencoe, Illinois. We have 725, according to our Casper license, of deployed iOS devices, plus about 400 or 500 other desktops and Macs, so a lot of stuff. I've been doing ed tech. I technically have to wait until tomorrow till I can say 15 years, but I've been doing it for a little while, and it's really been focused on Apple devices. And what was interesting is as I was putting these slides together, I was thinking about some of the projects and some of those fun things that I had the opportunity to work on and how trivial they are today, but how of a big deal they seemed like in the past. And one of the first stories, I'm competing with, sounds like a great video. One of the first projects I had was making it so, quite simply, if you sat down in front of a Mac, and this was 10.3 or 10.4, you could type in your Novell username and password. Everything that was on the desktop folder on the Windows 2000 machine or in your documents folder also came over to the Mac. And that was really focused on kind of that same piece of usability. We want to make it so that our users don't have to think too much about how they get their data and do what they need to do. And that's shifted now. So instead of these technical systems, it's how do we use these kind of cool tools. My email address is up there, and I'm kind of proud of this because that one bit of information lets you connect with me 4 different ways. You can send me an email, which it's kind of washed off on the bottom. I apologize. randy@rsaeks.com. It's a little tough during the conference because there's only one session after this, but you can use Randy, hey, you know, in person, that piece. Website, rsaeks.com, and if you want to use Twitter, @rsaeks. One thing I will say is if anyone does want to have a conversation, if you do want to use Twitter, what I like about that is that it's visible to everybody, so more people can participate in that conversation. So if you're interested in doing that, feel free. I always, for some reason, attempt to put together an agenda so that way, with the sessions going on, if there's something that doesn't fit in and you're thinking, you know what, maybe this other session sounds better based upon what we're going to cover, feel free. But opening with the phases, so when we do a deployment, kind of what are the questions that we should look at, and then talking about Apple's programs and all the other services out there for how we manage the devices, the people, and then the content. I'm going to share within there some of the lessons, and then I have hopefully about 10 minutes towards the end talk about workflow. So just kind of share, here's some of the incidents we've seen, and here's how we tackle them, because I think that when you're looking at deploying a bunch of devices, it's kind of beneficial. Caution. I love the one on the bottom here because as I'm looking out, I see a lot of coffee because I know it's the last day and it's the last morning. But if there are questions, we do have this lovely box to throw around. And if you throw it to someone else, please do not throw it at anyone's head. They will appreciate it. And make sure those around you are aware of the situation. Some days in our school, I feel like if we use this, we couldn't ever throw it at anyone because a lot of the times people just are not aware of their situation. So I did mention we have the lovely question box. Also going to throw on a link that's going to appear on the top of the slides. It should be directly above the green arrow. And it gives me this cool little view. No, it doesn't. It gives me that cool little view where if you have questions, I'll be able to see them. So if they're in a topic I'm in and I haven't covered that, I can look to do so. If there's an idea or a question someone else has and you like it, you can go ahead and upvote it. That way I'll really make sure to get to it. I hope. So these 3 phases, and surprisingly when I was putting this together, it took a really long time, and it turned like this 20-minute discussion with myself. Has anyone ever had those, the 20-minute discussions with yourself? It gets really bad when you get into an argument with yourself. But that first one, before you deploy these devices, really that first question of why are we doing this? And beyond, hopefully, 350 or 30 or 3,000 iPads showing up in your desk or near where you are, participating and knowing the reason why your organization is doing this. For our school district, one of the pieces we had was we want to make sure our students are ready to use these devices in high school. And that shifted a little of what we wanted to accomplish with them then. Rather than just giving the devices to the students, we wanted to make sure that we incorporated things like digital organization, time management. And what was neat about that is once everybody knew, from our administration to our teachers to us in the technology department, it was this unified vision that everybody kind of knew. And sometimes it's tough to just, all right, get them set up. Here, they're done, without knowing the reason why. Do we have what we need to be successful? And a lot of the times, this is stuff. Great, we want to deploy 350 iPads. Do we actually have 350 iPads? Is our network infrastructure able to handle this, access points? We have ample bandwidth. The aspect of people capital is really important too, making sure that, well, if we have all these devices, do we actually have the right amount of staff that don't already have 417 other things on their plate to be able to do this? Another piece along with that is if you have the people, but they don't necessarily have the skill set right away, is the organization going to commit to funding for PD? Hey, I really don't know voice over IP, but if I wanted to learn, are you going to stand behind and kind of allow me to learn and actually let me do it? The other important one is people here in schools. Are there a lot of schools? All right, so that's a lot of hands. That's good. That whole aspect of, do we actually have funding commitment for multiple years? Is this going to be something we're going to buy once with $50,000, or is this going to be a 5-year initiative where we have $10,000 every year and we can kind of plan on that? Kind of that longevity planning and the financial commitment is a good piece to make sure is present. During, great, we've had all these meetings, we've had all these devices. Now we're actually doing this. The stuff's out there. How well is it working? It's kind of silly to think sometimes we don't always ask that question, but it's important to look at, is everything actually working okay? And then working through that, what do we actually need to change? Is anyone else in here like a tinkerer? Like you like making sure everything is working at 100%, and if it's at 99.7, it's not necessarily great for you? I get that too. And looking through our deployment, there were pieces that we had to look at, and I personally had to say, you know what? We don't need to change this. Let's wait a little bit. I think in education, we're lucky because we have this schedule that kind of gives us some breaks built in. Usually there's one around July, another one around December, sometimes March, April. Those can be great things to put on your calendar and say, if we need to make changes, here are our 3 windows. And not necessarily click a checkbox in the middle of a school year that takes away an application from everybody. That's not fun, by the way. Don't do that. After, what was unexpected? What were the things that we thought would work perfectly fine and just completely blew up in our faces? One that we had, that I love telling this story, was learning how middle school students, especially in 7th and 8th grade, have difficulty in carrying stuff. And it wasn't necessarily like a clumsiness thing. It was just part of our school culture was based upon our structure. We don't allow students to have backpacks. Does everyone remember Trapper Keepers? Kind of those cool things that, all right, that was on the bottom of the stack with about 3 notebooks and then folders, and then you had 2 textbooks, and then on top of that was the pencil case. Sometimes the calculator was in there, and sometimes it was on top of the pencil case, and then stacked on top of all that, kind of tinkering like that top tower of Jenga, was the iPad. And you go into class, and you've actually made it there. That's a great achievement because you're looking at this just thinking, I know physics. I don't know how you're doing that. And then you put it down on the desk, only to realize the desk is slanted. And after a short period of time, the coefficient of static friction, is it science, anyone? We were debating about having the students try to calculate this, like at what angle does the iPad slide off of your notebook? Things like that. Wow, how do we change that? Finding out what our users think. When we asked all of our students about what they liked about their device and things they would like to see change, does anybody want to take a guess at one of the first things they said they would like to have on their iPad, considering that we kind of restrict the App Store? What was that one? Snapchat. Okay, Snapchat, no. Luckily it was not Snapchat. It wasn't Minecraft. No. We had a good amount of students. When we polled 300 students, the one that came up the most was wanting to have music, Spotify, Pandora. And the piece I loved about this was we took this conversation from a technical discussion right back to our teachers, because we were able to look at our network and say, well, we're not really using all the bandwidth, and we have the ability to actually prioritize streaming media lower than things like Google Docs. So if for some reason there's a bunch of students all trying to listen to music and some kids are actually trying to do work, the students that can do the work have the ability to actually go ahead and have that bandwidth. We took that question, we went right back to our staff, said, hey, the students are asking, can they play music? Does anyone want to guess what the answer to that was? Absolutely not. Wasn't absolutely not, but it was pretty close to, no, that'll be a distraction. But you play music in class for the student. Okay. But it was just neat, shifting that discussion from kind of that service aspect. That's kind of nice to think about. And make sure you spend time thinking about what worked well. As much as we always look at changing things that are broken or that don't work the best, when you deploy a lot of devices, there's a lot of things that really do work well a large majority of the time, and don't forget that. While we were completely blown away with the unexpected number of breaks, we were extremely pleased with our replacement process, so how we handled that, and it's kind of nice to work through, so make sure you kind of take the time to do that. All right, IconPalooza. I partially put that image color sidebar on the side, so I actually stopped putting icons on here. But I just want to run through kind of a bunch of Apple programs. If anyone knows the last one, I want to give you like a heads up and a thumbs up for knowing that icon. I'll talk about it at the end. So I'm just going to kind of touch onto most of these, hopefully explain in there how we've used them and why they're important. The one that's right on the top of the list is MDM, because you want to be managing your devices in a dynamic and flexible way. Not necessarily too flexible, but we want to make sure that we can make changes on the fly and we have a system that supports it. Why is MDM important? Many of the services that were on the slide below require an MDM service. Has anyone in here used Apple's Profile Manager? Okay, does anyone know how in Apple's Profile Manager you can make a list of groups that don't have the most current version of, let's say, iOS, and also need a Keynote update? I haven't found a way to do it. So that whole aspect of creating dynamic groups and being able to apply configuration policies to those dynamic groups is incredibly important. It allows you to do really neat things that I'll mention a little bit later, and it gives you nice ways to report on your devices. You can take a quick look and find a way that, well, the devices that have less than 10% free space, all right, I want to view them. So I can take action on them before they necessarily say, I'm full, I can't do anything. That's kind of how I felt at the conference with all the food too. Like, no, don't. All of that is going to make your job easier. Everyone likes their job easier, right? Okay, good. The Apple deployment programs, and this is as everything currently sits today, because if anyone went to some of the other sessions, we know that there's a new product coming out called Apple School Manager that's going to be out there soon. And you might wonder, well, wait, if we're in education, why are you covering this for something that's going to change soon? Really, it's a foundational skill. The programs that Apple uses for the new program kind of are still built upon the deployment pieces. So the way that you manage devices through the device enrollment program are kind of still important and are still required. Apple ID for students, is anyone using that? If you're using it, hopefully you got an email that says, watch out, July 31st. I'll have that in a few more slides. And then VPP, purchasing content. All really important things. This is just a quick little view of whenever I talk to schools or I visit other schools and we talk about deployment, take the time to set up locations if you haven't already done so. It's really nice because now the structure of the deployment programs matches your organizational structure. If you're a one school district and you really don't need to differentiate devices, it's perfectly fine as is. If you're a larger school district, it's incredibly nice to be able to say Bob or Jane belong to a specific location and assign it to a school. So it kind of lets you group devices a little bit. Create admins so that people other than you can do things. It's probably people other than you doing things is usually a good thing. And every so often, iOS 8 to iOS 9, and I'm going to assume it'll be the same for 9 to 10, make sure you accept the terms and conditions for iOS so that way you can actually use that version within the devices. DEP plus supervision. This is kind of a two-pronged approach. There's the device enrollment program, which just allows you to have all of your devices together, organized. You can add in an additional layer on top of that called supervision, which gives you additional capabilities on that device. It says, we as a school or we as a business or university, we own these devices, so we want to be able to do a little bit more managing it than, you know, the iPhone I have from Apple. I wouldn't want my organization supervising my personal device. You can create a customized setup assistant, which I'll show you in the next slide. It's really nice because it allows you to let your users kind of step through the setup process. I found there's a very different approach when you give somebody a computer or a device that's completely set up and ready and you say, here, or when you let them do it themselves. If you let them do it themselves, there's a little more organization, personal ownership. They kind of feel like it's theirs, even though we all know it's not really yours. We're just making it feel like it is. But get people involved with the setup process. It saves you time. And again, it feeds into an MDM service, so if you're using the device enrollment program to really get a good benefit out of it, you'll want to make sure you use it. I mentioned the Streamline Setup Assistant. Hopefully that's big enough so that everybody can see it. We require authentication, which means when we give somebody a device, they log in with their network username and password, and without us having to do anything, we now know which user has which device. It also locks it down, so in the case of somebody losing it, someone that maybe is no longer employed, not giving it back and trying to hold on to it and erasing it, well, it's going to make them log in. Allow pairing. That way, we allow individuals to take the iPads we give them and connect them into a computer. And we want them to go through location services to set up the right time. You can create the restore option. We want them to be able to restore their own device, so when they break it, we're not responsible for doing it ourselves and needing to connect it into iTunes. And then lastly, the Apple ID. If you're using user-based assignment for any of your apps through the VPP program, through managed distribution, you'll want to make sure that an Apple ID is entered. Just a small listing of when you supervise a device, extra things you can do. You can manage the home screen, which is really great for students at like the K1-2 level. You don't want them to have to try to find an icon. You've all seen the iPad where there's like 3 or 4 or 12 screens of apps. Trying to find the one can be a very tedious process, so you could manage this. Prevent changing the device name. we're a middle school, so we don't want to have this whole thing of, oh, look, your mom's airplaying to the classroom, ha ha. No, don't. Come on.
You haven't seen an iPad with the poop emoji as the iPad name?
Oh, you could do emoji names. That's a good one. Now that just makes me think of somehow you want to tell a story. You can do things where students tell stories just through emojis. Does that student also wear like the emoji hat? That's the poop? That'd be perfect. They make those, by the way. That should be the bad user. Like, go sit in the corner in here. You have to wear the poop emoji. The other one I love is a locked wallpaper. And this kind of plays in with the dynamic grouping. We use this for students that have found a way to install apps on their device, even though when we connect it to iTunes, we can't, and they can't change the Apple ID, but somehow they figured it out, and kudos to them. You can now play Spotify until we find out you have it and then hide it. But you can use the locked wallpaper in kind of that diagnostic workflow piece. For example, you're on a list of devices that have less than 10% free space. I'm going to send a wallpaper to your machine and then, based upon your group membership, say, you're not allowed to change your wallpaper. There's this really annoying message, and ideally you want to make it like a really ugly background color that says, hey, free up free space. And then eventually, once they're out of that threshold, they suddenly can magically change their wallpaper again. You'd be amazed how many times students, when you put kind of this official school notice, come in and I don't have any apps that shouldn't be on here. I don't understand why I have this. I will show you the app that you have installed. A little bit on DEP management. You can link one device enrollment program account, which there should be one just for your organization, into different MDM servers. I think this is really helpful at university or businesses where different schools or different organizations for some reason might have a different MDM product in place. If your organization purchases devices, you can ship these 10 into the School of Education and then these next 30 into the School of Engineering and kind of let them do it. If you're switching it all between MDM servers, this is also kind of nice because you can unassign them and then reassign them. Make sure you do not disown the device. That says we no longer have it and it's gone. View the history, see where devices went. The neat one within managing devices, we have one MDM server, so this is really easy. We say when we purchase new devices, automatically assign them into that MDM server. It saves us a whole lot of time. It's something that you all can do too. All right, I'm going to present a question. Let's see how this works. The Deployment Program Council, when you create admins, can you tier their level? Only download apps but not set restrictions. So I know within the program, there's the different pieces. So you could say a user has access just to purchase apps, but they don't have the ability to work with the device enrollment program or create or manage Apple IDs. So hopefully that answers that. As far as restrictions go, that's probably more of into your MDM for specific configuration profiles if you want to allow someone to, for example, just do some basic troubleshooting versus create settings and push them out. Hopefully that answered that. The Apple ID and the Apple ID for Students program. Does everyone here has an Apple ID? Does anyone here have more than one Apple ID? I'm actually surprised that there's only that many hands up. Kind of want to ask what's the record for the number of Apple IDs, but no one really should win that game. If you're the winner, you're the loser. We use the Apple ID obviously for personalizing content. If you're doing anything with iCloud or iBooks, it's going to be required. And again, user-based app assignment. So you do have that ability to assign apps to devices as well as users. If you do it, anything that's going to be user-based, there obviously has to be some ID that gets the app. The Apple ID for Students program. The current program that sits today is being discontinued on July 31st. I hope this is not news to anyone. I hope everyone got an email about it or somebody got an email about it in your organization. If you use the Apple ID for Students, what you'll need to kind of do is figure out how you want to migrate. If you have a small deployment, It might be something as simple as saying, you know what, we're going to just go with these for 1 year, let the students graduate, get out of here, and then we're not going to worry about it. If your organization has something maybe like 1,200 Apple IDs, you probably will want to look at something like just abandoning those and saying, all right, here's your new one. Just ignore the old one. Don't use it. Schools right now can reset a password for a student that then can log in, and then they change it. Since the program's going away, that is going to shift to need to be done by a student or a parent on the account because the information out there says the portal to do so won't be there. Fun, right? We all love Apple IDs. If you're not familiar with the volume purchase program, it allows you to purchase a whole bunch of content instead of going into iTunes. That's really nice. There are those two options, redeemable codes or the managed distribution option. If you're in a situation where, as a school, you buy apps and you just give them to students because that fits what you do, you can still use redeemable codes, and then that code is forever and always associated with the Apple ID that redeems it. K-12, for example, we don't want to do that. We want to buy one app and then 10 years later say, I have this Mac app that says it needs to run Mac OS 9.2. Can we still use that? We want to do that because that's just what we seem to do in education. But managed distribution kind of allows you to do that by assigning and revoking licenses for apps to devices or to users. If you do use managed distribution, it has the little MDM icon because you need to have an MDM to do so. And then my favorite one is, I always cringe when somebody buys 15 copies of an app, because for most vendors, once you hit 20 or more, you get a 50% discount, which pretty much means, unless the vendor doesn't support it, please don't ever buy 10 to 19 copies of an app. Just buy 20. If a vendor doesn't support it, sometimes you can ask them, hey, do you support the volume purchase program with educational discounts? Another interesting one that we'll see is apps that have in-app purchases. We try to steer away from those. There are some vendors that have a version of the app with in-app purchase, and then they have another version in the VPP store. So if you're ever caught in that scenario, reach out to the vendor to see, hey, we'd love to buy 1,000 copies of your app, but if we do that, we need it in the VPP store. Sometimes that will encourage somebody to say, you know what, I'm going to find a way to do this. I don't want to lose money. If you do anything with the managed distribution piece, what's kind of neat about this is managed distribution, of course, requires an MDM server. If you use a managed distribution app to a device, your MDM server is kind of now in charge of updating that app. If you switch it and you do it to a user-based assignment, that user then has the ability to go into the App Store, assuming you've given them access to the App Store, and they can go ahead and update that app on their own. Who's excited for Apple School Manager? That's currently in preview. All the information I've heard is it's one of those, it's coming very, very, very soon. Like, you should refresh your mailbox now. Oh, it didn't come in. All right, go check again. First off, if whichever account is using in your deployment programs the agent, make sure that's an email address that you access, actually exists, and maybe set up forwarding. So if an email does come to that address to say, hey, you're ready to migrate, you actually know about it. From the pieces that I've read, and if you haven't already checked, there's a whole bunch of help information. All the help documentation for School Manager is up online from Apple. Go ahead and read it. It's there, it's available. That way you're not kind of sitting with, all right, we have School Manager, now I need to go learn about it. You can kind of run through a lot of the help documentation and get a good feel for what it can do right now. So once you do have access, you can kind of get out of the gate running. It's going to allow us to do the same things that were in the device enrollment program and the volume purchase program and that whole portal piece, which, by the way, it's kind of like 3 different places you need to go. you're buying content, you go to the VPP store, and then devices is through the deployment piece, and then the Apple ID for students is this other interface. This is kind of consolidating them all together, which is really nice. There's also the capability to do things with iTunes U, and then Apple Classroom, which I'll mention a slide later, or 12 slides later, I don't know, some slides later. Is anyone using iTunes U here for like staff PD? It's an interesting way that your organization can kind of create iTunes U content that can be something as simple as, all right, we're going to introduce you to what you can do on your iPad. And here's the 10 apps that our school has that, well, we're going to assign to you as a teacher, so now you can get them and actually build in kind of some of that interactive PD or have it be on demand. So it's kind of a neat way to use some neat content to give a service kind of back. The one I always love is we get from a lot of our staff development, well, we don't have the time to go to the training that's offered before school or during lunch or after school 3 times a week. I'm too busy. You can take that time, put it into an iTunes U course, and then that way it's available on demand whenever that individual would like, and kind of set up maybe drop-in sessions. Hey, we're going to spend the morning, that lunch period after school for 3 days a week. Come in if you have questions. We can kind of work through it. Come on, clicker, do your thing. Kind of the same way that we create admins in the deployment programs, do the same thing in the Apple School Manager piece. There's various level of account access and templates. That way you don't have to worry about what are the right settings and fields to use for a teacher and which ones are good for students. There are 3 different ways out there to kind of create these accounts. You can connect ASM directly into your SIS if it supports it. That's a vendor decision. So if you're not sure if your vendor is supporting Apple School Manager, reach out to them, see if they will have it. Another piece is obviously going to be the good old CSV that everybody loves, or manually. As I was going through this myself, the one that I kind of settled on was, you know what, I'm going to go with the CSV option because I don't know right out of the gate, is Skyward, which is our SIS, going to support it? I know how to make a CSV. I've been doing it for a while. Knowing that today is June 30th? Is it the 30th? Okay. Whew. That's always a good sign when you have the right date. But knowing today's June 30th, these accounts are going to go away July 31st, I want to make sure that rather than spending maybe 2 or 3 days working with support to do this, I can spend 1 day, get the accounts done, and just kind of have them done. Please create 1 account manually. Please do not create 1,000 accounts manually.
Justify that paycheck.
That's a lot of time. That's a lot of clicking. I don't even want to think about that. So everyone knows kind of that traditional Apple ID. We all know and love it. Okay. And no one lit up a pitchfork, so that's kind of a good sign. Managed Apple IDs, they differ in a little bit. These were kind of those 4 bullet points that I thought explained the layering a little bit. Managed Apple IDs are controlled by the school or the school district, which is kind of nice. Right now, Apple School Manager, Apple ID for students, starting to get all these things wrong. You have to kind of create the account, but then the student verifies it, but then they really own it. So this is kind of change that a little bit and give you the ability to reset passwords, limit purchasing, role-based administration. Pretty similar to what we can already do. In that documentation that was out there from the help, there were some really nice ways that explained, what if we create these IDs? What do I really need to know about? And really the one that stuck for me was this first one, App and iTunes Store purchasing. That sounds great that, hey, our students or anyone with a managed Apple ID won't be able to purchase content from the iTunes Store. That's nice. Well, what if it's a free app? Includes free apps. So that means that if you use managed Apple IDs, you have to find some way to push apps onto the device or to do it through your MDM, because any commerce transaction for a managed Apple ID just doesn't happen. Obviously, Touch ID, Apple Pay, darn. Find My iPhone, Find My Mac, Find My Friends. The location-based services like those with a managed Apple ID won't function. It's not a feature that is currently in the documentation as it stands today, which is a preview, so it could always change. That means that your MDM should be able to put a device into managed loss mode. So if you're looking at an MDM, make sure it can do that. That one's kind of interesting because we use it a lot with our students when they lose their iPad actually in the school. Okay, where is it? Well, let's look at the map, and it doesn't play a sound now. FaceTime and iMessage are disabled by default, which is actually kind of cool. I think there's a lot of schools that are like, good, I don't have to hide those apps anymore. But if the student logs into their school Apple ID on their home device, they can. A format. I love this one because the Apple ID can differ from an email address. It doesn't even need to have an email address associated with it. I kind of like that. That's kind of cool. So if you don't give email addresses to students, you don't have to have this one email account that's like 400 aliases on it. And you know, anytime a student makes a free purchase or marketing communication, you have to go in and delete 400 emails. The suggestion is to use a username at appleid.yourdomain. You can customize this. The whole reason that there's this additional subdomain appended is so that you don't have an Apple ID namespace conflict, because there's nothing worse than when you try to go to sign up for your Apple ID and you have to be like Saeks17382 for your Apple ID. Anything that's managed will use this format, so it means, for example, for myself, I would probably create a managed Apple ID, sakeser@appleid.glencoeschools.org, and then I would have a regular one. So you can kind of layer that. 4 or 6-digit password options. This is great for younger kids that don't want to have to remember an 8-character password. Unfortunately, adults do require the 8+ characters, so that means probably if you use these with staff after spring break or like 3 days off, usually you'll have to worry about people forgetting their passwords. So everyone has had that happen? I know I wasn't here for 2 days, but I completely forgot how to log into my computer. Well, how? It says username and password. There's just 2 things you need to do this. And the school has the ability to deactivate accounts and then account inspection. You can kind of do some features with that. Some important password info. I didn't know this. This was a cool one to kind of read through and then think about and put up on a slide. Is the devices that are set up through the deployment programs. Within School Manager, if it's a device that you've assigned through the DEP, I guess, because I don't know what it's actually called in the ASM side yet, they don't require a 6-digit verification code. So if you're an institutionally created managed Apple ID and you're a device in the device enrollment program, you log in with your Apple ID just completely fine. If I take my managed Apple ID and try to log into my personal iPad, it's going to ask me for a verification code because that device is not tied into the program. That's going to allow you to control, do we want our students or staff or anyone with a managed Apple ID to log into personal devices? If you don't want them to do it, you do not share the 6-digit code. If you want them to do it, you print out a 6-digit code for each person and give it to them. Apparently, admins and teachers, if they're using any of the products with a managed Apple ID, are going to need that every 30 days, so keep yours handy. All right, I see a good question from Brian. So if I can get this to go, I'll throw this lovely question up there of, are there any concerns when students leave your organization with a managed Apple ID or an Apple ID for students, even if they change their email address to a purchase? To their personal one. What's kind of bizarre is once students hit 13 with the current Apple ID for Students program, it's their account. So they get to go and do whatever they would like to do with it. Luckily for us, we say we do a lot of user-based assignments, so once they are out of our school, your apps that we scope to you are no longer available. The nice part is, with what was in there for the managed Apple IDs, those you can deactivate. So when a student is graduated, you say that address is no longer available, and away it goes. Which will probably mean if you're creating Apple IDs and you're not doing something with like a graduation year, you'll probably want to append that in. Because we'll probably not run into conflicts with John Smith across 30 years of classes, if you incorporate that. If it's really simple, like for a teacher, you could potentially have 2 teachers come in. Does anyone have a teacher with the same like last name and first initial as another staff member? And is there like a fun email thing you do where it's, do they get a 2 or a middle initial or something else to differentiate it? Oh, hold on. If you'd like to share the story. Okay. Good, because I saw the coffee there. I didn't want to have to worry about contending that. That's kind of those deployment programs and why they're important. And now I'm going to try to run through a whole bunch of other small services really quick and tell you why they're really important to use. Caching server, please use one because we want to save bandwidth for more important things. You do not want a network device to look like this because there's been so much internet going through it. We've had people ask that, like, is the internet down? Well, nope, I can get to Google. Nope, no. Apparently that thing still worked, which is kind of impressive. Thinking about kind of internet bandwidth, our LAN, our internal network, is like less expensive than the outside network. And I mean that because we actually pay a monthly bill for internet access. We don't pay a monthly bill for internal bandwidth. And along that, expensive as time. It's a whole lot quicker to do anything over your internal network, unless you have a poorly designed internal network, than using the internet. In essence, the way that it works is in server, you put on a little switch. You say, hey, Apple, if people come to you from my network, send them to this server. And they can pull in content that's iOS updates, apps and the app updates, iTunes U course material, and iCloud data caching. Is anyone here looking at shared iPads? The idea of having multiple Apple IDs log in. There's going to need to be, if you remember portable home directories and all that fun, this data caching. You can do that through the caching server, so that way when a student switches an account, that data can go to your caching server and then go out to the internet or vice versa and make it a better user experience. The other one I learned is when you do that with server, there's a checkbox where you can say, I want you to cache user data versus apps, so you can have more than one that are kind of task focused. iCloud. Does everyone love iCloud? Does everyone love changing their Apple ID password and then finding all the devices pop up and say, enter your password? Sometimes when I hear people talk about iCloud, it kind of makes them think of this. I don't know why. So if you're using Find My iDevice, whatever that is for your phone, when you've misplaced it somewhere in your house, like where is it? It's not in the couch, where is it? You can do that. With managed Apple IDs, that needs to be done through your MDM. A lovely feedback item that I'm going to submit, that if any of you have worried about students or had the experience of someone losing a device somewhere internal, like under a chair, I don't know how that happens, how you lose an iPad under the chair that you're sitting in. But from what it looks like when you do a device put into managed loss mode, you don't have the ability to play a sound. Playing a sound on a device is a really quick way to have it be found. Because after about 6 seconds, anyone that can hear it kind of runs over to get it and says, get this out of here, it won't shut up. And they're talking about a device, not a student. iCloud backups. Hopefully no one's picking up students and running and saying, get this out of here. iCloud backup. Initially, when we were looking at doing our deployment, we're like, we really don't want to use Apple IDs. That's just a mess. People have to create accounts. I can't even imagine that if we did last year in our school year. The amount of devices we had where students were carrying them and tripped and fell, they were okay. The iPad was, shards of glass everywhere. If we didn't have iCloud on to do those device backups, I would have been spending way more time sitting in front of iTunes, connecting them and doing a device backup. It's automatic, it's in the background, it's really nice. The other interesting one, and this can be also for a staff piece, data separation. Well, my student already has an Apple ID on our iPad that we have at home. Can't we just use that on the school-issued iPad? Policy aside, yeah, you could use that. Technically, you have the ability to do that. However, there's this weird piece that suddenly comes up of, but as soon as you put your personal information onto our school device, we now have the ability to access that because, hey, you're troubleshooting your device and something happens to it, and it was just nice from like that student privacy aspect to say, your personal stuff used with your Apple ID, we're going to give you one that's school focused, school related, do your school stuff with that, and keep them apart. All right, I have 2 questions for the end. I'm just going to run through this one really fast because I think it's a cool tool that some of the times us as the techie folk can bring back to teachers and say, well, I know you're worried about students being off task in the classroom. So here's a way that you can kind of do this. Apple Classroom is this little app that works with your MDM that allows students to be assigned to teachers, and when devices are near each other with wireless and Bluetooth turned on, you can kind of get this little dashboard of the students in the class and see a list of the students, the apps that they're in. You can open other apps. You can do things like view their screen because walking around can be challenging to view screens sometimes. Lock screens, when you're saying something really important. Hey, all right, we're going to put a lock message on your screen. Look up here. Do things like create groups. I don't see anyone like this, so that's probably a good sign. All right, the magic of Apple Configurator. This has been an app that's been around for a little bit, and it kind of was frowned upon early on. I think some people had some poor stories that maybe I should have put the moose picture on this one. That's probably the reaction. There's a lot of neat things with 2 that you can do. You can do things like streamlining the device preparation, which means you don't have to go in and enroll it into your MDM and do all of this fun stuff. It's done through blueprints, which allow you to do things like assign content and configuration profiles and pretty much create what you want a machine to look like and say, go image it. We use them a lot for update stations, mainly because even though we have a caching server in place, if I have 30 iPads trying to pull down an iOS update through the access point that's like in the back of the room over there, people aren't going to be happy. It's just going to be slow. So what we did is we did a configurator station that had an action blueprint on it that just said update iOS. And students could come in during lunch if they want and plug their device in. Make sure you test it first so you don't erase and supervise their device. They will not like that. And then just update the devices that way. It ties into the DEP program. You can kind of work with an MDM connection. It'll work with the VPP, so you can now do the device-based licenses, which, did everybody love doing redemption codes for free apps in Configurator? No? Or paid apps in Configurator, dealing with that whole, download the spreadsheet, put it into Configurator, manage it. Yeah, so this way you can do things like that device-based assignment and tie it into those managed distribution licenses instead of having to worry about spreadsheets. Image capture. Other than this image, what's the fastest way to delete 417 pictures from your phone without erasing all content and settings? That will work after a few minutes. Has anyone used image capture for managing photos and movies on devices? It's incredibly fast. You can select all and you can transfer them. It's also great for movie projects or other times when you just have a lot of video content, because I don't want to have to wait for them to upload into Google Drive or iCloud or Office 365 or Box or Dropbox, or am I missing any? Google Photos. Actually, that's a great one. If you're a school using Google for Education, take advantage of doing the Google Photo Sync as long as everyone's okay with it for the privacy aspect. Because then those photos can go from your device up into the cloud with unlimited storage space for your account because you're a school, and have a nice way to work with them, and that's a very good point. Thank you.
Personal one's unlimited too.
So the personal one's unlimited for like one of the,
High resolution,
yeah.
full resolution.
But even then, it's a great way to kind of free up some of that space. I had no intention of putting Apple Care on here until I was sitting in a session, I think 2 days ago from Apple, about Apple Care, and you know what? We do use this service. We use it because people break devices. It happens. I know that there's other services out there where you can do things where it's I think SquareTrade might be one where it's, well, I'm not going to buy Apple Care, I'm going to buy this other warranty. Just think about the fees and how all that magic works. Because inevitably something like this is going to happen where it's just not going to work as you intended. I feel bad for the baby. Kind of like startled as soon as that happens. Like, what just, I don't get it. Maybe if I loop it enough of times, maybe I'll get like a sympathy laugh out of it. Before I go into workflow, 25 minutes left, good. I'm going to do 2 questions. Can you assign multiple VPP accounts to the same organization? By anonymous. Ooh. Trying to think, so if multiple VPP accounts, because you could have a university that has different purchasing centers, or even schools where you might have 2 different schools signed up individually for a VPP account. I know within your MDM you can link in multiple VPP accounts, but then it's kind of a mess of making sure you pull the app. At least in Casper I know you can. You can say which VPP instance that app is coming from. I'm not sure about if you want to then consolidate it though. And then, oh, anonymous strikes again. Can you explain device-assigned apps, how one makes this happen and or avoids it? So the neat thing about the device-assigned apps is it's is it iOS 7? Your MDM needs to support it, but what you then have the ability to do is take an application and say, rather than give it to a person, we're going to give it to a specific device or a specific group of devices. It'll depend upon your MDM solution on like the actual steps to follow, but first off, make sure the device is supervised. That's going to make it so that you can do this a lot better and make it kind of be one of those fun background tasks. As far as avoiding it, I think it's like it's a checkbox. So if you don't want to use it, don't check the device-based assignment checkbox. That's the best one I have on that piece. And if anyone else has an answer to it, or if there's anything you have, like you can add these in, your own answers to it, so that way if someone has done it, feel free to share. All right, now this fun piece. Workflow, does everyone love workflow? No, there's no one like, oh my gosh, this is what I came for. The reason I wanted to share these is they kind of do a little bit with telling stories of, great, we know why all these programs are important now, but how are you actually using them when stuff hits the fan? So I kind of pulled some of the scenarios that we've had, and things like, how do we handle broken devices and app requests and all this other stuff? I'm going to start with the first one. How do we handle broken devices, and how do all these different programs play into it? So device breaks, great, we have Apple Care on it, awesome. And that's going to handle the repair. Based upon how our devices are assigned, it sits there, and we're lucky enough to have about 15 to 20 spare iPads that are always available for switching out back and forth because we know things are going to break. Those devices are already enrolled through the DEP into our MDM, and users kind of have the ability to drop their device off. We do this lovely process, which, if the internet works, my extent of a demo is going to be showing you a spreadsheet. Amazing. We do kind of a format like this because we wanted to make this really, really easy. So we have our lovely sample usernames. We track this all, it's shared. We do fee calculations. So is it an iPad? When was it broken? What happened? And then we realized, surprisingly, there's a lot of typos that come up. You'd be surprised how many teachers don't actually exist that people have said that teach for us. Like, that's not, I don't know that name. So what we did is through equations. So we have this little link that sits in the cell that, in turn, goes to a fun, lovely Google form. The neat part about this is you can actually create a link that has data predefined. So you click this little link, and suddenly the name, the grade, the device serial number, the ID, the advisor is all filled out automatically. So now we've reduced the scope of errors from, is that a 6 or a G in a serial number, into something that's clicky. So the decision tree becomes, is it warranty, non-warranty, an iPad or a case? Let us know what happened. And Bob's your uncle. But when we did all this and we tried to automate it and tried to make it as easy as possible, that form goes to this magical repair sheet, which we use another service to kind of do an automatic mail merge, which then sends us an email. And we get a lovely piece of paper that actually we do indeed print out, because we all love printers, that looks like this. So now we have this workflow put in place where we now know, is this a warranty, a non-warranty repair? We track kind of the steps behind it. And then we went one step further in this troubleshooting workflow, and we said we're going to include on the bottom half of this piece of paper these steps that we would like people to follow when someone comes in with a broken device, because I'm not available all the time, and I don't think anyone here wants to deal too much with broken shards of glass consistently. Has anyone gotten a glass splinter from an iPad? Don't do it, please. But we communicate this back to our parents. So now we built into this kind of this workflow of, all right, so now our parents know. We make one app, we make sure one app, Notability, is set up to back up to iCloud, because we want to make sure that students don't lose their notes. Sometimes you have a student with 2 notes, and other times you get to the end of the year and you have like students with 417 notes. We use this lovely tool that I'll mention later. We check to make sure iCloud has done a recent backup. We have them turn off Find My iPad, and without any of our tech staff being there, we kind of have individuals that can go ahead and enter a repair. Here's the process for swapping things out. We get an email to know that there's a repair kind of floating around, and then usually wait 2-3 hours and then go pick it up. The replacement device is handled by allowing the students to go through and say, I want to enable location services. First off, I need to log into my network account, so now this device is linked automatically through the MDM and the DEP. I'm going to log in, I'm going to enter in and say, I want to restore this from a backup. The student enters in their Apple ID, and then they find the recent backup that was done through iCloud, because we wanted the students to be able to do that. So this kind of one process that pulls in, Google and Apple and repairs and hardware and tech and non-tech and all these tools, uses a lot of different services that, if they weren't set up and you're not using them, kind of can make this a very manual, tedious, painful by shards of broken glass process. App requests. If anyone works with iPads, you probably have gotten an email at one time that said, hey, can you install something on 417 devices? That's the first line. Does anyone want to guess what the next line is that's usually underneath it?
I need this afternoon.
Yeah, it's pretty much the, oh, and by the way, can we do this by tomorrow? Oh, well, it depends.
Which 417 devices?
Yeah, usually it's just then we just need it. So what we did is we kind of wanted to avoid that from happening, and again, using that Google idea, we created this form, and we do things like asking questions of what's the curricular connection, how are you wanting to use this, so we just don't get, I need Angry Birds. Okay, well, if you want to use Angry Birds, just pretty much we're going to approve almost anything. I mean, and it's not in a bad way, that's like our approach. It's because people are being thoughtful and they're thinking of that curricular tie to their app, they're actually thinking how they're going to use it, and then it becomes a better process. So we, again, do this Google Sheet. It fills out information. We actually replicated the paper form we were using before, and all this is done through a couple of fields that exist in Google. We get this form emailed. We're a school, so it means it goes to a committee of people that look through it and say, yep, that sounds good. We're going to go ahead and approve it. The other reason that this form is really, really helpful, and I think everybody might be able to view these, I'm not sure, is we added in the screenshot, or I added in the screenshot that tracks in our vouchers, our purchases, the amount remaining, and now we've actually allowed our teachers to give us a list of the apps we have. Because we know our core ones, here's the Google tools, here's 38 total apps that we say we want to have. If we want to add something, we're able to track that all in one spot. And when another request comes in for like a coloring book, It sounds silly, but we've had people use, and has everyone here used a coloring book? Like if you use any of the apps and realize that suddenly it's 15 minutes later and you're kind of actually relaxed by doing it, or angry, depending upon the staying within the lines thing, but you can point to other products you're already using. So this one is just Google plus the volume purchase program, but then we assign the apps through managed distribution in our MDM to the users. This one's always fun, iOS updates. We do it initially and at the end of the day through a caching server. We always start by saying, uh-oh, iOS 10, iOS 9.1, something was recently released. All right, we're going to block access to it on our network just because we really don't know if it works. And quite honestly, we don't want 47 people downloading iOS 10 or 9, whatever, in the classroom and then installing it in the middle of class and then not being able to do their classwork and so on and so forth. So we start with it blocked, but it's not blocked at home. And we do it through DNS. So we take the software scan Apple server and we say your IP address is 127.001, so you go try to look and your device says, I'm not a software update server, I don't know how to do this. I think there's some other ways you can do it too, like on a router level or a filtering level, depending upon the product, but we just went with the boring DNS one. So the question, or eventually that device does go home. Eventually it gets accidentally updated, and we just let those individuals be our testers. We found, oh wow, if we update this, AirPlay doesn't work. Oops. Well, we need to update these other systems that we need to do, but let's also not push it right away. Eventually, you hit this critical mass tipping point where, you know what? 75% of our users are on the most recent version of iOS. There's like someone over there that's on 8.4. How are they on that? Unfortunately, you can't push with MDM the software update to 8.4. I think that was a 9.1. So first, make sure everything's at least on 9.1. Make sure everything's on like 9.3.2 because you should always be running the most recent version of iOS because it has security enhancements and other improvements. Eventually, we hit a point where we say, all right, we're going to use our MDM server and say if you're an iPad not running iOS 9.3.2, we're going to send you a push notification that says, hey, go update your iPad. And then a week later, it doesn't happen, but the list has 30 people in it. So we go and say, all right, we're going to send you a wallpaper that says, hey, please update your device. And we wait another week, and then the list is 20, and like, oh, they just changed it because they didn't like the color. We're going to push the wallpaper out through our MDM, and now we're going to make a configuration profile that's going to lock the wallpaper because this is a supervised device because we said so when we created the enrollment in the DEP. And then you eventually lock that. And then on 9.1 or higher, you use your MDM and say, go get the update. But we're going to let you install it because we don't want you to do it yet. We want you to do it at a convenient time. And then you hit like 2 months later and just say, you know what? If you haven't updated by now, you're doing it. Student app installs. I still haven't figured out how they do it. I think they go to like a website where you can install a untrusted or unverified developer cert, and we change that option, but occasionally we get someone that comes on in and they say, well, I have Spotify on here. We primarily try to use self-service, mainly so that we don't get this giant list of 438 apps that are installed on 27 iPads, and 10 of them are all text editors. We do want to try to standardize it a little bit just so that it's a little more consistent, a little more reliable. We use Google Drive and Google Docs and Sheets and Slides and Classrooms and all of that stuff, so it kind of makes it easy for that. And we give them this lovely self-service store, and we also include for our school newspaper. So we link in there a PDF document, and we're going to start next year exploring actually putting out training docs. So if you're a teacher, maybe we'll give you, instead of trying to remember where it is, on the intranet page, just hey, if you're looking for the document that explains how to do X, Y, Z, find it in self-service under the help category. We can kind of do it that way. So this one, again, uses VPP for purchasing content and assigning it to users as long as they have an Apple ID or devices. I know there was a question about device-based assignments, so I'll do that after this one, this is the last one I want to share. We use Casper for managing devices. Do other people in here use Casper for managing devices? So there's a couple of hands. I'll go a little quicker through it then, but I can explain more later. The process that we had for this is we wanted a way so that non-techie staff could do things on devices without giving necessarily non-techie folks access to techie systems. Sometimes it makes you worry of what's going to accidentally happen. So what we did is we started out as an Apple script, and then it evolved into a Swift project that then was an Xcode and now is a Mac app, which is just kind of cool. It allows us to do things like this, and there's probably a way within other MDM products to do something similar. Obviously, this is Casper focused, but we create a new user that can read our mobile devices and then read or update static mobile device groups. So we create JSS no, that's a bad example. Don't use JSS as a Casper username. That's probably not a good idea. Username, Jim. We're going to just use Jim because that's the first one that came to mind. We create a group. This is like a troubleshooting group. We grab an ID from it. And again, since there's not a lot of Casper use, I'm just going to jump through this and you can catch me up at the end. There's some neat things you can do with a lot of MDMs where you can apply settings but then exclude devices. So in essence, what we've done is we've created a user that has very limited access. We've created a group that we're going to use for troubleshooting. And we say that group should never get our student restrictions. And then we built this lovely piece of code that talks to our Casper server. It uses the group ID that we made, a username. You can click a Save Settings, and you get this lovely plist file. I love plist, it's great. And then you click it to open it and make a change, and then it opens Xcode, and then you're waiting for 15 minutes for Xcode to finish. But in essence, what it turned into is I enter in a password, a serial number, or a username. And then I get some info. I click a button. The restrictions move away. So that way we were able to take this really, really technical process that the Apple program for that one is obviously MDM that we're using. Take this really clicky process and make it less clicky. That's the short version about it. It was useful for us for quick troubleshooting because we lock the App Store. We make it so users can't change their account settings. Have a way that if you do restrict users from changing accounts, you have some way to easily undo that. So when you need to check for an iCloud backup, you can do so. We use it a whole lot unintentionally for standardized testing. For us, we're a Park state, which means we use TestNav. And occasionally we found that a student would be testing on their iPad. It was locked into single app mode for TestNav. So when a student logged in, they put in their password, it locked the app, it would just freeze in the middle of a test. Like, oh, this is a standardized test. We really don't want to just turn the thing off and on. But you can do things where some of the times removing a setting kicks an app out because it's no longer managed that way. So kind of have that idea of if you do apply settings or restrictions, have a way to kind of test them ahead of time, but also have some plan in place for how you remove those when you need to troubleshoot one device. And it doesn't become this piece of, well, to change this, we have to turn it off on 300 devices and then turn it back on. We love the turn it off and turn it back on line. It's great for everything. So what's good about this is there's a little counter in the back that says I have 6 minutes left. I think I might have all of the questions that everybody submitted. Oh, no. All right, there's more, so this is perfect. I'm going to vote down that one. Can I get rid of that one from anonymous? What MDM solution are you using and why? We use Casper for our solution. One piece we liked about it was it has the capability, if we ever want to add on Macs onto the program, we can do that. We just found it was very, very flexible and granular. What I will say is we used a different MDM prior to our one-to-one deployment. In that one, we were using Mass 360 by FiberLink, which I think now is IBM. I don't know if the ownership's correct. And that product also worked fine for us in the deployment we had before of mainly 5 or 6 iPads per classroom. It was a different kind of management style where Apple IDs were created for the users to have on their device, and a teacher then could manage it. In that case, it was just kind of the cultural model of how we use the device said that this product doesn't really fit it. Oh, good, that one was downvoted. I'll never figure out who it is. I know this is challenged, but it's kind of funny. Where did it go? Where did it go? Where do broken devices first enter data into your workflow? Can students submit the form on their own? I think actually the students could at least submit part of it because there's variables within the MDM that sometimes can say, I'm going to generate a web clip that's based upon dynamic data that could include the device serial number. A challenge with that could easily be that something gets put in for repair that isn't necessarily a repair. So we have some basic troubleshooting, and then kind of our workflow is if something's not working, we go into our library. We have a couple of individuals there to help out, and they are able to kind of run through it. It starts with us filling in a form to kind of assign all the info, and then it just goes out from there. Okay, I'll never figure out who you are. It's sort of fun. Well, that's good because now there's 4 minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions and or answers or stories or war stories or I'm completely full. Oh, good, there's 2 hands. I get to throw it. All right, I'll do this thing, so I think that should simulate it being thrown.
Hello. Okay. In an attempt to save money, we want to buy fewer licenses than we need in total for apps.
Okay.
Is it reasonable to think that we can move them around from device to device using MDM in a timely manner?
That's a great question. There's always a small portion of time when like a transaction needs to unassign and assign. Right. Sometimes it might be a day for a device to check in with inventory. But with the device-based assignment, and this is great for schools, you know what? I'm going to buy 30 copies of an app that costs $10. And based upon when we're studying this, all right, this class has it for this month, and then it moves to this class for the next month, and it moves to that class for the next month. In theory, I mean, we've used it moving licenses back and forth. Mm-hmm. It's completely supported for the managed distribution piece. I do know that for most of the apps, too, there's like a grace period where if the app gets deleted or no longer assigned to that device, the user can sometimes still have access as long as it is not a managed app, at least in Casper. Like if you do a managed app, once it's unscoped, you can say, when this is no longer assigned, delete it right away. So depending upon the app, you can either have this small grace period where users can still access their data, or you can just immediately say, no app for you. Now, is there one more? Oh, and 2 minutes. This is perfectly timed.
I'm just curious, was there ever a time when you managed devices that had absolutely no Apple ID functionality whatsoever, where you restricted all Apple ID use completely?
We did it primarily in an early version of Apple Configurator because it was like a checkout device. We wanted it to be completely consistent. The Apple ID was handled through the configurator piece, but nowadays some of our checkout ones, we use that where it's, all right, it's a temporary use case. Once we log in with our special ID, it's just going to start blasting out the apps, and it never prompts for an Apple ID, which is kind of cool. Well, there's 50 seconds left. Are there any more questions? If not, I'll let you go to the snack break. Oh, okay. Sorry. That's all right. Hey, well, we're here. No pressure.
Okay. When you talked about about your Apple workflow or the workflow for the iPads being broken when they get broken, we are one-to-one with MacBooks, and we have a loaner program where you go to the student help desk and you get a loaner, and then yours comes back. Now, most of the iPads that we've ever sent in that have ever been broken have not actually come back, so it becomes a new asset, basically.
Okay.
So do you use loaners, or do you assign that child the new device immediately and then send that just let it come back?
It depends on the time. We're fortunate that we have a couple of spares. So what we'll do is you take your old one that wasn't working, we restore it, That one is now yours, and then when your replacement comes by, we put that back into the spare workflow or pile. Well, I think based on that the music's on. I'm done. Thank you for listening for so long.